It's 6 o'clock. We can go, yes. Welcome everybody. First of all, I'll say that it's a one-item agenda, but it's quite an important item, as you probably all appreciate. And in fact, it has been deferred on a couple of occasions, so we get this right. First of all, apologies for absence and substitute. Amy, are there any apologies received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Band. Councillor Gordon-Smith is attending as a substitute.
Thank you very much. And then, are there any declarations of interest that have been received before the meeting? And whether you have any members of any interest in the clerk?
No interest received before the meeting, Chairman.
Jolly good. Okay, fine. Right, okay, well, we're on to the first part. One major part of our agenda. Setting up a commercial company. We've had the papers in advance. It's a very technical subject. I mean, I've read it several times. It seems to be quite difficult to get. But I think I'm going to invite Mr. Clark, first of all, to introduce in context, and then ask Mr. Bainbridge to go into more detail, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, as you say, very important part of our investment strategy. This report is tonight. Just to remind members how we got to where we are. In July 2017, full council agreed to set up a company to support commercial and investment activity going forward. And then there was a subgroup of the ONS that met a few times and decided to set to focus on the property strategy before looking at the company. So that property strategy was agreed by council in April last year, and then as part of that report, the Investment Advisory Board terms of reference changed, and it was decided by council that the terms of the investment company would be determined by the Investment Advisory Board, with having taken consultation with the Value for Money ONS. So the Investment Advisory Board have set out their proposals for the company, and Dan will talk through those in a minute. So what we're looking at this evening, Chairman, is for members of the Value for Money overview and scrutiny to look at the proposals, take into account the legal advice, and then submit comments and proposals to the next meeting of the Investment Advisory Board. If I could just sort of add a little bit of context around this. One of the reasons why the council felt that we need to have a company is to open up the opportunities for investment and generating income. And there are certain things that we said at the time that we can't do as a council. One is to buy and operate market housing, either for rent or sale. We're not allowed to do that. We've taken legal advice on that. So we can, as a registered social landlord, through the housing revenue account, build affordable housing, but through the general fund we can't build or operate market housing for sale or rent. So a company would open up an opportunity for us to do that. And some other councils have actually gone down that route already and are providing market and affordable housing through their companies. Another reason for having a company might be to get into joint ventures on property with other councils, or to buy out of borough where we're borrowing. And our legal advice has been quite clear that if we are buying within the borough, that's absolutely fine. If we're buying out of borough using our own resources, that's fine too. As soon as we're buying out of borough and we're borrowing as well, that borrowing starts to present challenges legally, because we'd only be borrowing to generate a revenue. We couldn't make a case that the rationale for making that acquisition would be to develop our local economy, and so we then would need to do that through another vehicle, and we're suggesting that would be through a wholly owned company of the council. So members will be aware that in our medium-term financial plan we have a target income in order to help address our financial challenges going forward from property. Now that can be from property that we acquire ourselves or that we acquire through our company under our strategy, which allows either to happen. At the moment we are struggling to find good opportunities coming up in the borough. They're few and far between, and therefore I think it's timely that we come back to the council's approval to set the company up and look at this detail. And if members, you know, after discussing it tonight, are broadly happy that we go back to the Investment Advisory Board, then we can get this moving forward, and that will help us deliver the required savings. It's as we've said in the report, you know, any use of the company, we would take legal advice and financial advice as well, because we've got to look at our tax implications, because as a local authority we don't pay corporation tax, but this would be a company, and it would be subject to corporation tax and potentially different VAT treatment as well. So, as we've said before, we would need to take some specialist legal advice around that when we're setting up the company to make sure that we maximise the advantage of using the company as opposed to doing something ourselves. So, Chairman, I think I'll pass over to Dan now, and Dan will just steer you through the main parts of the report, and then what Mary's thoughts are.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to sort of flesh out what Graham said in terms of why the report's come to you, the delegation from council following their meeting was for the Investment Advisory Board to determine the final details in respect of the company, following consultation with yourselves, comments from yourselves, which is why we're here. Now, when the board met on a couple of occasions towards the end of last year, which would be October, November time last year, there was a fair bit of work inputted into those meetings from officers looking at potential structure, including discussing potential structures with colleagues from elsewhere in Surrey, those who have done this and who are thinking of doing it at the moment. So that fed into those meetings. The investment board has obviously made certain decisions in terms of what it would like to see in terms of structure, and that led to some further questions that they raised, which is why we took the legal advice that we've taken, which appears in Exempt Annex 2. I'll try and talk about some of that advice without reading it word for word. Obviously there's a reason why it's an exempt, and we would normally put that level of advice into exempt, but I can of course talk about the principles that come out of it, and no doubt you'll want to. Clearly you'll want to have these discussions in open, and so I'll try and avoid any need to go to exempt, and probably you will want to do the same, I'm sure. In terms of the advice, there were 5 questions which you'll see that our advisors have come back on. But beyond that, in the body of the report itself, from paragraph 7 onwards, so that's page 7 of your papers, there are various items that the IAB has identified and taken a view on, and where that has then needed further massaging, if you like, or development since the November IAB meeting, then there's some additional officer comment underneath those within the body of the report. So what you've got before you is advice addressing some of the questions that we needed external advice on, and that's in Exempt Annex 2. You've got some the recommendations from the IAB, the decision of the IAB, with further officer comment on some of those things. You've also got at Annex, I'll get the Annex numbers right, Annex Part 2 of Annex 1, you've got the Annex to the Council report, which set out in fairly lengthy detail various details around shareholder function, boards of directors, those sorts of things. And that was the basis on which the council said, yes, we're happy to go ahead. So that's your background information. That's what the council has already looked at and said, yes, we like that structure effectively. I mean, we've talked previously at both council and investment board about flexibility, and Graham talked about some of that. So this is not just about flexibility in terms of dealing with some of the tricky legal issues in terms of buying outside borough and borrowing to buy outside borough, but also flexibility to do things such as purchasing and or building, developing housing that might be market housing to supplement affordable housing that a company might build. There is by building housing through a company the ability to offset the right to buy provisions within the Housing Act, so that you're not losing the properties that you build to effectively to the private sector from the market from the social housing sector. You'll note that the report is headed up as creation of a commercial company, and that's because, like some other authorities in Surrey, we would want the flexibility to put, potentially to do things other than property investment through the company. With the council's projected budget gap being what it is, there may be and there surely is a need to generate income in other ways. And if we define the company through its articles and memorandum as widely as possible, we'll retain that flexibility, and other authorities have done that, particularly sort of Mole Valley and Elmbridge have done that recently to maintain that flexibility. So there are some pros around the company. There are some cons as well. Obviously, the company would be subject to corporation tax and potential VAT. Now, we're not going to be able to answer some of those questions tonight because we're not tax experts, but we would take, in terms of in setting up the company, we would obviously take specialist tax advice externally, and so we would legal advice as well. And we would be able to do that once the details are finalised and once those advisors know what we're looking to set up. I think that probably covers everything. I mean, I'll sort of take the legal advice as read, and if there are any questions, I'll deal with those questions coming out, and as I say, hope to avoid need to go into exemption.
Right. Before I want to make a point. If you wish to discuss any information concerning the exempt Annex 2, then we'll have to go into an exempt session and the webcast will need to be turned off. Okay? Right. My colleagues, Mr. Hall, Councillor Holder.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that this company is set up properly, with registered in Companies House, has a board of directors and shareholders, and the shareholders are responsible to the operation of the board, and it is run in a completely open manner and not a kind of closed company in any way. So I wanted to make sure that that is the case.
Question.
Is that a question?
You
So,
just want to
the
make
answer
sure
is
that-
yes. If it is, it goes without saying. It will tick all of those boxes.
Yes, it's a fair question to ask. Councillor Nazir.
Could we float the shares straight away as we open the company, or?
We wouldn't be looking to float shares.
Yeah.
It'd be almost certainly very, very low
Yeah.
share. Yeah, probably one.
Councillor Adams.
In paragraph 11 of the first part of this report, it talks about the HRA interface, and it says flexibility to allow Waverley's HRA to retain ownership and management of any affordable housing element or joint venture functions of the company. How if this property belongs to the company, can the HRA retain ownership of it?
Sorry. Oh right, yeah. So this was really around right to buys, and so if the so properties owned by the company wouldn't be subject to right to buy.
Right.
And so there might be some flexibility around that. There are about sort of 60 councils who have set up housing companies in the country, so it's quite a well-trodden path, and they're building properties both to address the affordable, but also to subsidise that with their own market housing as well.
Right.
And of course we can't do that at the moment.
Right.
So there are some flexibilities to work across with the HRA, but there are also some restrictions as well. So it would very much depend on what the company wanted to do. So the company can't the council, the HRA can't run market housing to help subsidise its affordable housing, but the company can.
But, yes, but this is saying that if the company builds affordable housing, how can and it therefore belongs to the company, doesn't it? How
Yes.
could it then be, how could the HRA retain ownership of it? Say we're building a mixed site, we're building market housing, we're building affordable housing.
Yes.
So the suggestion is that the company will retain ownership of the affordable housing because, to prevent it being given the right to buy. Yeah?
That's correct,
Yeah.
Another.
So if the company owns the affordable housing, how can you say here that the HRA will retain ownership of it?
Because it's wholly owned by the council, by the authority.
Oh, yeah, but it's owned it at arm's length, you mean?
Yeah.
Not, it doesn't actually belongs to the company.
Sorry, Joe. I think it's a very fair point. As far as I understand it, a bit like interest income, there are some aspects of the council's activities which don't get classified as either general fund or HRA. They get, if you like, interest income gets parcelled out to the two, but it's seen as a corporate activity, an overall council activity. Is that not correct? And it seems to me, but as Brian says, I mean, if you've got the ownership title to a mixed site, it's in the company's ownership, and that too is surely a corporate ownership. It's not a general fund company or an HRA company. I mean, I just think the word is HRA just be wrong. I mean, it's misleading.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We need to thank you, Councillor Adams. That HRA on that first line needs to be deleted. What this should say is flexibility to allow Waverley to retain ownership and management of the affordable housing element. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
It should be to retain ownership via the company.
Yes, so it's yes, by the company. Yeah, so it's still in the council's ownership, but by the
Ultimately. But it's very important. If you always follow the title. The title will be held in the company's name, not the council's name.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Right, Councillor Seagull, I think we're next.
Thank you, Chairman. I hate to go back and revisit something that Graham just very eloquently described in the introduction, but on page 2, para 2 of our papers, it states that the council had decided, based on some legal advice, that we need to set up a company to borrow to purchase commercial property outside of the borough. But then the same paragraph says other councils have chosen to do the exact opposite, which means they're breaking the law or our legal advice is not correct. Could you just revisit that for us? I know we keep going through this, but I just want to be very clear where we are. Are we legally required to go down the company route, or are we not? Because this is saying that other councils have chosen not to do it, and they're potentially breaking the law.
So our legal advice says that if we were borrowing to buy out a borough, we would not be able to do that ourselves. We'd need to do that through a company. What the report just alerts members to is that there are some councils who are borrowing to buy out a borough and doing it themselves. And so they've taken a different approach to risk there, and that a risk of challenge, and I can't really comment on the process they went through to get there, but Spelthorne have bought properties out of the borough as a council rather than through a company. East Hants did one recently. So there are other councils that have got themselves comfortable with whatever advice they've taken and have made those decisions. But we've taken legal advice, and we are, and that actually is what most of the Surrey authorities are taking the same view as us. And as a group of finance directors, we've shared this on a number of occasions, and we've sort of shared legal advice as well, actually, just confidentially. And I think 10 out of 9 out of the 11, we were all very comfortable with the position that we'd taken, and 2 had taken a different view.
And to that, I don't know, it's not necessarily either of the 2 that you say, one's breaking the law or our advice is wrong. I know that others have had advice which is different, and as Graham says, they've made themselves comfortable with it and said, well, we're happy to go with that advice. You know, it's the classic position of being able to get, you know, a piece of advice that says one thing compared with another piece of advice that says something different, but we're not happy. I suppose ours is more cautious, that's true. They've probably been slightly bolder in terms of their approach to risk, as Graham says, and they've had advice which says that you can do this.
So we're essentially in the realms of balance of, it's not absolutely certain, but the strong balance of probability is that the requirement is the one that we're following.
Yeah, what the legal advice says is which sort of legal powers you could rely on under different circumstances. We haven't been able to make anything fit what we're proposing that the company would do to what the advice is saying would be a safe route. Some of the other councils, including the couple we just mentioned, have obviously got themselves into a place where they've made a case and satisfied themselves that they could support that in the event of a challenge. But we haven't been able to satisfy ourselves that we would be able to use the provisions that our external legal advice sets out for the kind of acquisitions that we're talking about making. So it could be, as Mole Valley have just done, they bought a supermarket in South Wales through their company. But they did it through their company because they took legal advice that they couldn't do it as a council. Otherwise they wouldn't have done it through the company. And so that's the same, that advice is very similar to the advice that we've taken and the interpretation that we've placed on that advice as well.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with that, yeah. It's just
it's okay.
Par-
Well, personally, I mean, I think there's actually, by doing through the company, it's also less restrictive on what you can buy, isn't it, I think, actually, is that right? By doing through a company, it's less restrictive on what you can buy, really.
So
Less restrictive what you can buy through a company than through the council.
Less restrictive.
Less restrictive, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Right. Councillor Rand.
Thanks, Chair. On the same point, are we sure that we are protected in the sense that the revenue, for example, will require the reasonable man on the Clapham omnibus? Apparently this is a phrase coming back in the vogue because it confuses European translators in the mind. Would he perceive it reasonably as the council sticking to what it's supposed to be doing, or just by trading through a company which it owns and no one else does, and for whom it is the only client? It's purely a stratagem to do things which otherwise it couldn't do, in much the same way as the revenue comes down on people with tax avoidance schemes.
No.
I'm not saying this is tax avoidance.
No, I appreciate that. So the Localism Act specifically allows authorities to trade through a company. There's a specific provision within that legislation for councils to do things. They can do anything that any normal person can do, but it then has provision for companies. So it's set out within the Localism Act 2011, and there's provision in there. So I think it would be very unusual for the revenue to come in and say, you're using this vehicle, you created this vehicle to do X, Y, and Z.
Clearly to break the law.
Well, the government recognise that there are certain things that authorities will want to do or can, that they're allowing them to do through commercial vehicles.
Has there been case law to support that?
There's been nothing to say. There's nothing to undermine it in terms of challenge.
I mean, precedents.
There's been nothing to undermine it. So until there is, it's good law.
I mean, 2 questions coming from. One is, I think, after all, this stems from the Localism Act, which is since it's labelled 2011, actually came to force in 2012. So we've had 6 years, basically coming up to 7. And as Daniel says, there's been no one challenging it. You've had a certain amount of usage, which will make it very difficult for the revenue.
And a lot of noise from the market without potentially challenging.
Secondly, am I right that the reason why people like Spelthorpe are taking a more liberal view presumably they're taking the wide view of the general power of competence, which says, as you said yourself, you can do anything that a person can do. And after all, if anyone wants to invest in commercial property in Aberdeen, living in Hazelmere, they can. So, I thought the same argument.
Yeah, I can't confirm now the basis on which Spelthorne have reached that decision or any of the other authorities. I mean, I do know some of that detail, but it wouldn't be for me to. But they've had different advice to us.
But actually, it's not their acquisition out of Borough that's under question. It's their borrowing to acquire out of Borough, because our legal advice says we can borrow out of Borough. We can go and buy something now with our own resources. So it's more about their interpretation of the legal advice around borrowing to acquire that.
Because again, a person can, people do, the whole buy-to-let industry is based upon people borrowing to buy property,
Yes.
sometimes nowhere near where they live.
Yes.
So again, on a localism basis, you'd have thought, well, in general, why shouldn't the council be able to do what it's saying? But anyway, it isn't relevant, because as Councillor Seaman said, we don't know why we're taking a somewhat more cautious view, which is probably more comfortable for us. So there's really not much more to say on the point.
But have we heard any more about the political aspects of this? Namely, that several months ago, the press reported that the government was getting cold feet because, quote, some councils are buying stuff nowhere near where they live, as if that immediately makes us incompetent. But do we know if there are any mutterings from central government as to whether they're going to stop us doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, no, so it depends what they're going to try and stop, because the government works with SIPFA to ramp up its prudential borrowing, which is statutory guidance that they issue that governs how local authorities borrow. And actually, what they came up with was a strengthened a requirement for a strengthened declaration about the purpose for borrowing. At the moment, there's nothing at all that I've read that will stop local authorities buying property. It's more the borrowing that's irritating the government, but also, you know, just words of caution from the market around local authorities going into territory that it doesn't understand, which is about acquiring commercial property, and you know it's not core business, and therefore local authorities should make sure they take proper advice and not try to be property developers, and it distorts the market and things like that. But there's nothing come through yet that is saying that it will be outlawed, just more justification and transparency around the decisions behind it. And this is probably where Spelthorne have got themselves comfortable, because they're saying we've built a strong rationale for making that acquisition. We've got ourselves comfortable with the legal advice on the borrowing, and therefore there's no reason why we shouldn't do it.
Okay. Right. I don't want to continue doing some time. I did members first, okay?
Yep.
Councillor Adams.
Could I raise the issue of directors? I mean, do you think that 4 directors is a wise number? Would it not be better to have 5 on the basis that then you'll always get a majority? Secondly, would that 5th one perhaps should be third party, especially somebody who knows a lot about other types of property, which would then provide the sort of input which we don't have?
You stole my thunder, actually. That's what it is.
So on the first question, what was felt to be important by the IAB was for there to be a healthy balance of officers and councillors as directors. Now, the articles of the company won't be able to specify that 2 directors have to be officers and 2 directors have to be councillors, because the company is blind to what roles other people hold. But the shareholder, the council, would only nominate people from those particularly, sufficient a number from those categories. And the reason that it's expressed as 4 is because if you have less than 4, what we're saying is that the quorum needs to be at least 3, because then you always have one of the other number. If you could go to 5, but then where your quorum might be then would need to be 4 in those circumstances. If it were only 3, well, you could have 3 councillors in that situation, which would not be what the
Well,
IB wants to see.
I'm actually suggesting that the 5th one be a completely independent person who actually is an expert really more in the type of property.
So coming on, so
program.
on that point, so non-executive director effectively, we have talked about that previously at this committee, and the IB has discussed it as well. That is in the July 17 council report that's at the back in the information in the annex to that report. That could be something that you recommend to the investment board. It comes at a cost.
If the quorum is 3, you could have a situation with the quorum being 2 councillors and the outside guy.
Yes,
Well,
with no
don't
officer.
get a look at it. I don't think that's what anyone intends.
No, and I think that's what the IB would not want to see. The con in terms of having a non-exec director is cost, and it comes with remuneration. But yeah, it does come with the benefit potentially of effectively professional experience, potentially with property knowledge as well. But I don't have much that.
Well, yes, okay, you might have to have 4. What I'm suggesting is that when you set up the Articles of Association, you make provision for 5. You don't have to have the 5th one straight away, but you've got the facility already set up so that if you need that person because of opportunities that come up that we don't understand very well, then you could, the shareholder could appoint it.
So this point was kind of raised by the chairman in the briefing that we had earlier, where
I prefer an independent chairman, quite frankly, but I mean, I'm not going to go a bit further than you.
Well, that would obviously require a more expensive,
Yeah,
somebody
but
pay
my-
even more.
My view is that if you're looking at this sort of to generate more substantial income than it does now, then we have to need that sort of expertise. But I mean,
Well,
that's my view.
I would agree, but let's make sure we're earning the income first to pay for him.
Mm.
So make provision for the facility in the Articles of Association,
Yes.
but don't necessarily appoint him until we're ready to do so.
That's a chicken and egg, though, isn't it? You don't know which
Well,
one.
no, I mean, because once you set the company up, it's more difficult to start adjusting the basic fundamentals of it.
That's fair point. Fair point.
But do we have to pay it?
Well, not to employ it, no.
Yeah, well, even then, why?
Well, if you can
People
find somebody
volunteer.
who'll do it pro bono, yeah, then fine.
We all do.
Well, no,
We have to have this in the chair.
It's all right. Yes, Councillor Alden.
Well,
the
just
point is here, we're asking for somebody with real expertise
Yes,
in the subject we're trying to deal with.
following on from Councillor Adams, the London boroughs have pooled their resources as far as their pension funds are concerned, but they have created a huge, it's called a London Collective Investment Vehicle, but they have an independent chairman who is a specialist in investment. And I agree with Brian. I think to have an independent chairman is what we should be advising the council to have, rather than everybody being involved in the council.
Right. Councillor Seaborn, then I shall go to Councillor Gray, because there was person very quickly.
Thank you.
Seaborn.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the members' comments so far about this independence of a chairman, and having an odd number of people on the board so that you've actually got a decision-making majority available to you for making these decisions, I think would be good. One thing that's lacking in this paper right the way through is actually any indication of the costs of running the company, and that would actually apply to an independent director. I mean, we're not talking about doing a huge amount of business through this vehicle. We don't have line of sight to any business at the moment that we know of. So, you know, this is not about hiring a full-time non-exec. It's someone who might well work on a per meeting basis or whatever. But it would be interesting to know what we're talking about. You know, is it a few thousand? Is it tens of thousands? That would be helpful. And then going on from that, if we borrow through the Public Works, we're going to have to pass that on with a premium to avoid giving an unfair opportunity, presumably. is that going to actually apply to any of the services that the council provides for the company as well, i.e. officer time? Will those have to be marked up, or is that something we're legally allowed to do at cost?
I'm not sure about the markup on the overheads. We'll need to check that out. But certainly you're right on the borrowing. Council C1, you know, we would borrow PWLB and on lend to the company, but can't do that at a preferential rate. It would need to be at a market rate, and that's all specified in the company setup. And so as for overheads, I'm not sure whether we're allowed to sort of deliberately profit from that, but there'll always be a markup anyway, because we'll put the full-on costs on top of the actual, if it's people salary, and if we're selling other services to the company, well, we'll have an appropriate rate to do that. But then obviously the board of the company won't want to be ripped off by its shareholder.
No.
So,
what I'm trying to dig for is the actual cost of doing business through this mechanism.
yeah.
Because there may be a materiality level
Yeah.
beyond which or below which it's not actually worth doing the business, that we haven't actually identified at the moment.
No, that's a good point, and we haven't calculated that at this point. We wanted to get members' views on how the company should be set up and structured. And actually, we can talk to the other. Most of the Surrey authorities have a company for either housing or property, and we can certainly talk to them about their experience of running costs and how they operate things like overheads. But it very much depends how we set the company up and what we intend it to do. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg there.
If we don't charge so much for officer time, then we'll be paying more corporation tax if we're successful.
Well, that's the other balance in here. Yes, you're right. Yeah. So the higher the costs, the higher the running costs, the lower the profit on which you pay corporation tax.
Yeah, as an aside, actually, I asked a question at you, but we haven't done any comparison of other structures and things and whatever. Anyway, Councillor Gray, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm very supportive of the property strategy, but I've got some concerns here, mainly around the areas of governance. When we saw the papers for the original company, one of the objectives I understood that it would go away and fully evaluate the cost and the implications. I'd expected to see some financial workings which shows what's the difference going to be between A and B, is there a question of size and other things. You've raised some points today, and it seems that the setting up of the company is a little bit premature to me. You've got a risk with 4 directors. You've got the risk that you get into a deadlock situation. You're obviously trying to avoid, by your set-up shadow director issues. It would seem to me that you would be a lot better on your independence with an independent chairman and your 4 directors, rather than actually even going to 5 directors and they appoint a chairman. I think there's going to be very difficult to argue in some cases there's not a link back to its shareholders. Those directors are going to find it very difficult to be able to demonstrate their independence. Having an independent chairman, I think would actually help that situation. You've raised the issues about the advantages or otherwise of doing this through a company, and some people have made other arrangements. At least your arrangements, should there be a challenge from the tax or other authorities, means that you wouldn't have to pay a large amount. You've gone on for the safe side, and I think the safe side includes the issue that you will be paying corporation tax and other things, whereas if your scheme was found not to be valid, then there might be a claim for you subsequently to come in and pay taxes. So that to me seems a sensible choice in terms of going for the structure. I am concerned about the modelling and the details about this. We're still no further forward today than we were when we had the original decision, and there was a list in one of the meetings of the things that would be done before we set up a company. I don't feel we've actually done that. A couple of questions on kind of observations on governance. I think it's going to be difficult to be able to audit this company with the same auditors for the council, and I would ask you to take that into account and consider it. I think the other issue that we've got a merged role, which I had some concerns about, and that was finance and property. So Peter Vickers' role becoming both the finance advisor and the manager of our properties. I'd like clarity as to how that role would fit vis-a-vis the property company. I think that we all need to understand that. It's confused, Sir Chairman, about the status of the IAB. There's a lot of discussions in the backup papers on what the IAB isn't, yet the ONS here is actually reporting back to the IAB, and that I feel slightly uncomfortable with. It should be reporting back to the executive, because it's the executive, I understand it, and the council through the executive that's delegated this to the IAB. I'll stop there. Right.
Well, yes, fine. I mean, you can go back. Right.
There might be a couple of other points.
Just following on from John, I did ask actually in the briefing some quite detailed questions about the role of the board, and was assured it was meant to have an independent voice. And you can see the optical problem with that because everyone's part of the council. But nonetheless, I think the use of the IAB as an unconstituted, i.e. not a committee, just a body of people who've been called together to give advice on whether property transactions are wise or not. I don't personally have a problem with that. It doesn't really matter whether it's coming through, whether the property will be bought by the council or the company. It should only be bought at all if it makes sense commercially.
Could I just come back on that? I've been a nominated director of a company numerous times in my past, and there are issues associated with it. We're saying when they're not nominated, but the reality is they are nominated. I think you should look again at how you structure that.
I don't think we said whether they weren't nominated, it's just that the articles wouldn't specify whether they were councillors or officers. So you would be nominated by the council.
Yeah, I've worked in companies where they are actually, it's covered in the M&Arts, and you've got groups of directors, and it's really set up around their governance. It's something for you to look at. I'm not. You've looked at your advice and you've done it. I'm saying that I've worked in a number of companies. There are challenges, Stephen, right, associated with it.
I mean, I think fortunately, one good thing about property deals, and we also ventilated this, they don't happen overnight. They take several weeks to complete. I think one can therefore have some confidence that providing it actually happens, the board of the company can exercise a second and independent view on the wisdom of any investment. As I understand it, that's a crucial part of it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So in many ways, it might be expensive in the sense that you might well get different external property professionals being hired, one by the IAB to give the initial advice to whether they should be getting involved in a particular purchase. And then, as I understand it, the company's board might well feel the wish to get a second, different source of advice. And it wouldn't say yes to the investment through the company unless it was actually independently satisfied it was a good idea. And I'm right, am I not? That is what should happen.
That's what we said, yeah, absolutely. I take all those comments on board, and Councillor Siegel's as well, and the points about the independent chair. So we will take those away and have a look at them, and we'll take us back to the IAB. The authority itself and officers and members are not unfamiliar with exercising different roles and exercising different hats, if you like. We do that whether we're monitoring officers or sitting as trustees of other groups as an authority, and all sorts of other situations wearing multiple hats. There is advice in there, in the legal advice in Annex 2 regarding statutory officers, and I think that advice is pretty clear. and we as officers, I think, would agree with that we don't want to get into a situation where we're compromising the ability, say, for me to advise the authority if other members of the legal service are also advising the company. So we will absolutely take that away.
Councillor Gray, are you happy with that answer or not?
I wanted to make the point.
Yes.
I mean, I think my last point is I'm surprised that having briefed the audit committee, we in the beginning of it, the audit committee has not been consulted on any of these positions, nor is it actually reviewing it, except when we have questions to do with the statutory accounts. It's an observation, it's not a request or anything else, it's just purely an observation. You have an audit committee, they seem to have been sidelined for whatever reason, conscious or unconscious.
Comment on that? The point is taken, right? Anybody else wish to say anything? Oh yes, get an order, yes.
Thank you. Article paragraph 10, third point, entering into joint ventures to deliver. Obviously, if there is a property that is desirable to be purchased, we're going to be in competition with several other boroughs, and it would make sense if we got together with the other boroughs and made a bid on behalf of all the boroughs, rather than compete against each other. And I'm wondering how that is being incorporated into this and whether it's possible to do that.
There are risks attached with authorities talking to each other about how they might play the market, so to speak, or engage the market, particularly around anti-competitive activities. There has been talk about also the flip side of that, councillor Holder, where authorities talk to each other and choose not to involve themselves in certain in certain opportunities because they might let the authority next door proceed to purchase that property. That is potentially highly anti-competitive. So those sorts of discussions will need to be very, very carefully thought through. Where we've talked about joint ventures in here, I know that our head of housing strategy, head of strategic housing, Andrew Smith, has certain ideas about joint ventures with in terms of affordable housing, developing affordable housing, and getting involved with potentially joint ventures with developers for much the same reason that Graham talked about in terms of market housing, funding social housing and affordable housing. But yeah, there are certain dangers attached to collusions and arrangements in terms of what you invest in. You don't as a group of authorities, and a lot of the noise from the market already. I think that one member had already referred to was around around the borrowing, and although Councillor Mullen has said there's been no challenge yet, that's probably where a challenge will potentially come from in the future is the noise around authorities potentially distorting the market. So that we need to think about that very carefully. Is the short answer to it.
Do you shout out, Mr. Blackford?
So it could be. So just looking at the bullet points, acquisition stroke development. Now we had a joint piece of work going on with Surrey Council looking at this site and their site across the road here. So it wouldn't always be about acquisition. A joint venture could be with Surrey County Council, for example, or indeed a private company to develop a site as opposed to acquire a site. So I think we were just trying to sort of cover all the potential opportunities that having a company might throw up that might be more advantageous to do through a company, or only possible to do through a company, versus ourselves. If there's anything we could do ourselves, then we'd probably always do that outside of the company, partly because tax reasons, and it would be more straightforward. And so it wouldn't always be about acquisitions that we might get into a joint venture, but it might be a development that we do jointly with another council.
Like East Street.
Yeah.
Another one.
I'm assuming, am I correct, that the company would be able to act only for us? Or could it act for other councils?
No, it would be set up to act
Purely for
for
us.
us.
And that's possible
for,
under
the
the
authority, for this authority to
articles.
move things into.
And equally, the only shareholders could be us.
Right, anybody else wish to speak? Sure. Any discussion, I think, actually. We come to a recommendation here. I'm going to find this, because I've got a record. It says the recommendation is it is recommended that the value for money and customer service overview and scrutiny committee reviews the proposals, including taking into account the legal advice received, and submits its comments and proposals to the next meeting of the Investment Advisory Board on the 26th of March 2019.
I think it's a list of comments which have been taken down. Could I suggest actually, to make sure everyone's happy, that they be circulated in draft to members of the committee, so those who've made comments can make sure that their views have been accurately.
What about the question raised by Councillor Gray that perhaps we should be reporting to the executive rather than to the AIB? It's a good point.
It's a good point, yes, definitely, Mr. Bangor.
So the council delegated it to the IAB on those terms that it was effectively in consultation with you to receive your comments, and then they would discuss that. So council has made a decision for it to be delegated to the IAB and not to the executive, or back to council.
Isn't her normal role to report to the executive? Normal role, whatever the subject.
I don't think there'll be anything possibly either stopping us or in any way anything wrong with this committee deciding it will report to both. Our obligation is to report to the IAB, so we should definitely do that. But I think it would be wise if we also sent a copy of our comments, whether agreed, executive as well. Because we have, in a sense, we've got a double responsibility, we just want to carry out both.
Absolutely. But the next meeting of the executive is not till June.
This is not going to happen overnight. In many ways, it's the next executive who will be particularly interested, and it may be a different complexion to the present.
Would you be happy with that, Councillor Gray? Would you happy with that as a way forward?
See different ways.
I'm happy.
That's what I meant.
Okay, fair enough. We incorporate this as well. Okay, right, on that basis, are we happy with the recommendation, the revised recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed? Wow. Okay, this is, that's just, I don't need to say it, okay, thanks for that. Well, going in a minute, well, since there's nothing else, that's the end today. So, on the last meeting I had, the committee for this session. Oh, so this meeting. So, good luck everybody.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. It is the end.
The end is nice. Yes, no. No, thank you very much. That's quite helpful. Okay.